Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us again today. We have a guest composer speaking to us from South Africa. Anybody who is going to join us live, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to anyone who will watch this interview later as a recorded interview. I would like to thank our guest today for taking out of his time, giving of his time, and joining us. So, first of all, I'd like to start by asking our guest, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Not too many problems.
Oh, okay, good. Good to hear that. So, as has become the tradition, I will invite you now to introduce yourself to us. So, let's kick off the interview. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Qinisela Sibisi. Who is Qinisela Sibisi? Qinisela Sibisi is a musician whose life is guided by three forces. First one is his faith in God. The second one is passion for all things musical. And the third one is the endless search for excellence in everything that he does. Now, Qinisela Sibisi has been involved in music for as long as his memory can stretch back. At various stages in his life and career, he has been a singer, a songwriter, an arranger, conductor, music student, a composer, educator, a piano keyboard player, and has tried his hand at many other instruments. He has been involved in musical genres as varied as choral classical music, gospel, jazz, and South African indigenous and traditional music. Although he was born in South Africa and has lived there all his life, musically he's a citizen of the world and he sees music as the universal language of all humankind. He has a voracious appetite for learning and he is constantly upgrading his musical knowledge, his skills, craftsmanship, and his range of expressivity. He recently retired from duty after serving more than 30 years as a music educator. He is a husband, a father of two grown children, and a grandfather of two. Now, as to perhaps when I started music and the influences that have
Yeah.
inspired my music, it's a long story, but generally, I would say from as long as I can remember, I have been living with music and surrounded by music of all types. Now, uh, having been having acquired polio at the age of 9 months, I became disabled, and I had to live in an institution where there was some medical help and there were educational facilities within that institution. Now, that institution was in the rural areas of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, which is the province where I was born and grew up. Now, this was a mission institution which was run by the Lutheran missionaries, and we grew up with prayer, we grew out with hymns, choral music, and amachoruses all the time, morning, noon, and night. So those were the first things that shaped my memories. The choral music that we sang mostly there was usually the choral music, is choral music from Western composers as well as by the South African composers who wrote mostly music on Western style music on Christian themes. You know, to be people like A. Kumalo, your B.B. Miataza, and your John Knox Bokwe, and several other composers of that genre. However, that mission was surrounded by prime farmland in the Natal Midlands, And there were farms all around us, as well as there were some areas of indigenous traditional people, where people still lived as closely as possible to the original way that Zulu people lived. Now, we went to school with all those children from the farms and the schools from the indigenous, from traditional areas. And so, while we were singing hymns and religious music there, we were getting the influences from the indigenous people within the school. So it was not unusual for us to sing hymns and then sing traditional and indigenous music and the music that was being promoted in the family. And so there were many, many, many influences of my life. That was for about the first 12 years of my life. And then in 1976, at the age of 13, and then I went back to my home where I was born, which is in Durban, Guamash, which is a sprawling urban area, a very, very urban area. Now, Guamash has always been very active in the arts. And even now, even today, you still have many, many, many people from Guamashu Township that have been in the limelight in many various genres and many other spheres of arts. Guamashu is a township that is very good in the arts. That is when I got the change in attitude from the Christian missionary view that of life. And remember, this was 1976 when things started happening, when the resistance, which had been going, when the resistance against apartheid and racial oppression was beginning to filter down to the grassroots. Because before then, the struggle had been fought behind closed doors. The apartheid government tried to squash this thing. It did not filter to the poor communities and to the local people. And then in 1976, then things started coming through. And then, of course, that began to be expressed. Then we saw an emergence of many composers who wrote music with a social conscience, and the music that was affirming our African identity, even within choral music. Now, as I said, my influences have been varied. I'm not only engaged in choral music all this time, but also engaged in all the other forms of music. So my outlook on music, from composition to performance and to the kinds of music I listen to, is very eclectic and is very varied and adventurous, and it has no limits and no boundaries.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's good to meet you. You are a well-known South African composer. Thank you very much for agreeing to have this interview with us. So it's interesting to hear about your background. You talked about how varied it is, how you started, choral music, then music with the children from a nearby lands. Um, I was just let's talk about you as a South African. You said music of a social conscience, or music with a social conscience.
Yes.
Yes. Your inspirations for writing music today. Let's look at South Africa of today, or Africa of today. What would you say are the major topics that are of relevance that you think more music should be written about?
Well, as artists, you can't dictate what inspires people. Inspiration comes in various ways to people. As I said in the beginning, I was inspired by the environment I grew up in. So I wrote mostly Christian music, and a lot of people know me for my church music, which still inspires me today. But also, I am inspired by the things that go around me. People can write everything as long as it is expressing what they feel and what they think they should communicate. I think music is a form of entertainment. That is one. But music is an art. Now, the duty, not the duty, or one of the responsibilities of an artist is to express himself or herself and express the environment that he or she is living in ways that can communicate with his audiences or with whomever he wants that message to resonate with in a way that can resonate with those people. So now, as I said, I see myself as a musical, as a citizen of the world. So whatever issue that affects the citizens of the world, if I'm inspired by it, I can write about it, and I would encourage all the other composers to do that as well. Not exclusively, but whatever. For me, music is an art. Art is about skill, and art is about talent. Art is about skill, but most of all, art is about expression. What you are expressing and who you are expressing it to.
All right. So speaking about topics that matter to your area, your world, the world, you composed the work on Gandhi, if we put it loosely in that way, on Gandhi or about Gandhi. But as we are aware, he's becoming a rather contentious figure, or some things that he said, or something he said. And
Yes.
there's been some activity in your country in particular.
Yes.
So it's becoming contentious. So let's talk more widely. Besides Gandhi, how does a composer deal with changing times and potentially a revision of history, or a reassessment of history, or even more scrutiny on history? How does an artist who is talking about, you said they record what is going on today, they talk about topics that, going on around them typically, or in some cases, things that matter to them as well. Gandhi must have mattered to you, or maybe it was a commission. But how do you deal with these changing times then?
Yes, to begin with, Gandhi was a commissioned work. She was commissioned by the government of the province where I'm living in. Now, Gandhi, at that time in 2006, he was still known as one of the people who started this, one of the people who started the struggle against oppression. Of course, he was fighting mostly for his Indian community, but his influence extended beyond his Indian community, and he influenced many people. Like we know that Nelson Mandela was one of the influence whose tactics for fighting apartheid were inspired by Gandhi, and there are people like Martin Luther King internationally who were also inspired by the tactics of Gandhi in fighting his battles. Now, what we were commemorating back then in 2006 was the beginning of Gandhi's satyagraha. That is the struggle, the peaceful struggle against oppression, against racism at that time. So now, actually, we were not celebrating the man himself, but we were celebrating the satyagraha. Now, as you can see at the end of the sentence, long live the spirit of satyagraha. That is the struggle for independence using peaceful means. Now, that is what was celebrated. Then all of these things that are now coming out about Gandhi, I was not aware of at the time. I was one of those people that admired his struggle, his effort, and his principles, and not the man himself. And if we go back to the history of music, there are many composers who were like that, who were controversial, who did many things that people did not like, but their works are still celebrated today. Now we celebrate the works and not the men.
Interesting. Okay, thanks. That's pretty clear to anybody listening. Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure. No, I
Okay.
wasn't saying anything.
All right. So you admire what he was doing and not the man. Let's talk about people that you admire. Or perhaps people you admire because of the works, because of their works. Let's talk about other African composers and your relationship with them. Are there any African composers that you, Qinisela Sibisi, admire?
Yes, there are many. There are quite a few. Now, going back to the 70s, most of the music was just uh, more Western type, more Western oriented. Until then, people like M. Mwerane, who started writing music that was more adventurous, that just tended to move away from the hymn style and expressed the African rhythms, but was also enriched harmonically and melodically. And then, the kind of music that moves you in many ways. He was not overtly political, but he was expressing the his surroundings more than any ideas. Like you get the music like the dinoto. This means expressing the sounds of the machinery in around Johannesburg where he used to work, expressing it very musically and all the things that were happening around him. I was very intrigued about those kind of music. And then, of course, you got people like Professor Mzilikazi Khumalo, who expressed his Zulu nationalism and his Africanism in his music. He was still writing mostly at the time in the Western, mostly Western idiom, but he incorporated much more African influences in his rhythms and even his choice of harmonies. And then things started shifting as we became more and more Africanist and became to express more of our world than before. And then there were people like Kulegani Makubane, who still wrote church music, but then expressed African rhythms, expressed it in the African way. And then, of course, we have whom I consider the greatest of them all, my brother Pelelani Mnomia, who was just recently deceased. He just took us to a completely different level. And all I can say that I've been always in awe, and I'm in awe, and I'll always be in awe of him and his art.
Okay, thank you. May he rest in peace. Yes, he passed away recently. So thank you very much for that. It Am I correct in saying that all those composers are South African composers?
Yes, those are South African composers. Now, remember, for a long time, South Africa has been isolated from the rest of the world. For a long, very, very long time. We couldn't get the music from the rest of Africa. In fact, the music from the rest of Africa has always been suppressed by the previous regime. So we didn't really know much. What we could get was usually something that was smuggled in somehow, because there were always activists who would bring in music, but we couldn't get hold of most of it. But when going back to the rest of the world, I said that my influences are many and varied. I remember the music of the late 1970s American. That's the music that first brought to my attention that you could express radical views in a not very aggressive manner. Just sing like you're singing a love song, and then in between just throw in things that make people think, what was that about? And then things like gender issues, which here in Africa are rarely, in African music, are really expressed. But you'd find it somewhere in in a love song or in a church song, a song that somewhere has just one line that makes you think about the relationship that men have with their women, which is one of the big issues here in Africa that we do need, we have to deal with. But all those kinds of music, and then you had people like Quincy Jones singing songs like, "What good is a song if it cannot inspire, if it has no message to bring? If a song cannot take you higher, it's not good enough to sing." And then we got all that kind of music coming at us and made us think about what we are writing and why we are writing. And in fact, at that time, I wasn't even taking writing seriously. I was doing mostly performing, singing songs. And then when I tried to find songs that expressed the things that I wanted to express, they were very, very few and far between. And then I started writing.
Mm. So you started. So is it correct to say you started writing because of what you just said? You couldn't find songs that expressed what you wanted to say, so there was a gap as far as you were concerned.
Yes, yes, definitely. In many ways, like for instance, at around my mid-teens, I find myself in having to be a choir master and conductor of a church choir, which had to present music every Sunday. And every month or so, there would be maybe a concert where we have to showcase church music. Now, I was a poor child from the township, didn't have the resources to go and find the music elsewhere. So I couldn't do the songs that everybody was doing because generally what was happening, the same music was circulating around all the churches around. So, and then I decided, let me try my hand at writing something. Okay, and then some songs were well received, some were not, and then I learned from there. And then it came then comes this era when then now we have to find the music with a social conscience, even within the church and even within the community, and find that there wasn't much available there. So I found myself having to write most of the time. Thanks.
Okay, that's really interesting. So you didn't actually study at all, but you've written large bodies of work. You've written Zulu mass, operas. I mean, from somebody who did not study, who just wanted to fill a gap, that's quite a gap you
No,
filled.
I did study, but that was after I had started writing. And then when I went to high school, and then that's when uh, uh, actually even then being a professional musician or being involved in music was not my first priority. When I went to high school, I wanted to be a doctor because I saw the need for doctors in my community. But I happened to go to a high school that was just across the road from the University of Zululand, where there was a program run by the famous Professor Kabim Ngoma that was introducing music education studies to the to black students at the University of Zululand. So we were just across the road from there, and then that is when I was introduced to the works of George Friedrich Handel, the oratorios. I didn't know there was something called an oratorio then. Um, I had sung some songs by Handel, but I thought just like African composers, they were just pieces from here and there and over there. And there was an orchestra conducted by a black man. All the musicians were black. They were playing Western instruments, and they were playing. The choir was black, and they were all playing Western music, Handel's music. It was beautifully composed, and it just really, 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 and I would say it bowled me over. And I said, how do we have African pieces like this?
Okay.
Where everything, where people can go and say, let me go and see a complete work by a South African composer involving an orchestra and there's a choir and everything like that. And it's then that I decided that, yeah, maybe if I don't become a doctor, I would become a music student. Then I
Okay.
completed my high school. I couldn't get a place at a medical university. So I went to study music just across the road with the great professor.
Oh, brilliant.
And the
All right,
rest
that's
is
good.
history.
Yeah, the rest is history. Fantastic. I mean, you talked about the skin colors of the people who were involved in the orchestra performance, the choir, and it means that at that time, and I think even till today, to some extent, in South Africa, people's skin color actually mattered. So that had an impact on you. Because for
Yes.
somebody like me, for example, that will not have an impact because I just expect everybody, it's sort of standard that everybody is black, or maybe one or two non-black people there, but typically we are the majority in our country and it's just normal.
Yeah, that was a surprise for me as well to see that all black orchestra, everyone there was black. The conductor was black, and the choir and the soloist. Then the music was out of this world. You see, for that time, I had never heard music like that live. I had heard it on records, of course, but it didn't make much impact on me. But when I saw it right there, performed by black people, and then it really changed my life.
So
And
it
then I
was
decided to
unusual.
study music. Yeah,
Okay, so
it
it was
was
unusual to
unusual.
have. Okay, uh, uh, let's talk about your decision. Then you couldn't get into medical school. You decided to become a music student. Was there any resistance from family? Did anybody say, well, you wouldn't make a living, or you would not be able to make a good living out of this?
And not in my family. In my family, really, they were all just trying to survive. I come from a very poor family. Everybody was trying to make a living, and nobody really cared what anybody else was doing. But the schools, the teachers at my school and the principal had all noticed that, right, I was doing science, wanted to be a doctor, but they had all noticed that music was my passion, and they all encouraged me that you do much better in music
Okay,
than in any other field. Yes.
okay, that's nice.
So I
It's
got a
really
lot
good
of
for.
encouragement.
Oh, that's good. It's really good for young people, well, anyone to be fair, of any age, to be encouraged in the line of that they choose to go into or their passion. Let's
Yes.
talk about the influences. You said your influences are varied. You can't point at one particular thing or another, but you did mention several times so far. You've talked about Western music and the
Yes.
influences of Western music. We'll talk about African music specifically and try to define it. But can we just talk about African composers? We have been influenced, or African composers. Africa as a continent is typically, known as one that's influenced by outside um,
Yes.
industries, cultures, everything we do. You can see scatterings here and there of outside influences, external influences. Do you think African composers and African music is influencing enough people who are not Africans?
Well, going back into history, we could say that all music came from Africa. And that's what history tells us. It's just that the other people, having moved out of Africa, had to find ways outside of Africa to express themselves differently. But music, actually, everything musical originated, because the human race originated in Africa, just to begin with. Everything, every kind of human being originated in Africa. So what we can say, we are just influenced by the things that they had to do. Now, the music is influenced a lot by the resources that people have available in their community. Now, where people have forests and trees, lots of trees, people make lots of drums and most of percussive music. But where there are no trees, where there is a grassland and there is a net, people make reed flutes and people mostly sing in those areas. And then as the resources build up, people then start using whatever resources they have to make whatever music. Now, Music is a human endeavor. No other creature in the universe makes music for enjoyment and for expression. You can say the birds sing, but they are not singing for pleasure. They are not singing for to please other birds. You can say they are dancing, but they are just expressing a message. The only creature that makes music for enjoyment and for expression is humans. So music is a human endeavor. Now, whatever resources that you have do influence your music. Now, we have things that we have gained as tradition that we have been using over the years. Now, we can use those influences, like the Americans have taken the rhythm, African rhythms, and made jazz out of it, and then they are selling it back to us in Africa. Now, what they did, they took our rhythms and our rhythm patterns, they added as a new melodic lines and new chord progressions. Now, chord progressions that we could have invented in Africa had we had the resources that could develop those things. But then, now that they are there, let's use them. And then, but let us express our issues, let us express our art, let us express whatever we have and take it back to the world. The world is ready to receive music from Africa if if something in it appeals to them. Now, what we need to do, we need to upskill ourselves and make our music attractive to them. I can tell you they are receptive to African music, but the thing is that the excellence. And then there's something that what does that thing make you feel like? One of the most important thing about art is that okay, you can have all the skills, you can have all the knowledge, you can have everything, but at the end of the day, what are you expressing? And do you connect with your audience? If you can connect with somebody, that thing can go. That's what you should be working on: connection.
Okay, so making a connection with your music and not just putting notes together.
Yeah,
Um,
not just putting those. Yes, exactly.
okay, all right. So that's about that. Sort of has covered the influences and how different parts of the world influence each other. Interesting that you said everything started in Africa. All people come from Africa. I think that's what's generally agreed upon now. Um, let's come back to you as a composer very quickly. Do you know
Yes.
how many compositions in total you have worked on?
I don't know. I stopped counting a long
A
time
long
ago.
time ago.
But actually, it's not many compositions because, like I said, I was influenced by people that write big works. What you call big works that have many movements within, maybe four or more movements in there. Actually, I haven't written too many works. It's just that the works that the few works that I have written have produced many individual pieces from themselves. So usually it gets people as individual pieces, and then they think it's a lot of work. Whereas actually, I don't think I've done works with many individual works in between. But then again, there is this thing of being frequently commissioned to write music for various situations, and then usually I write that, and then while I'm working on it, I'm always working on something else. So I haven't had time to stop and catalog all of it because I'm always inspired by something or always commissioned to write something else.
Okay. But that will be an interesting catalog to have a look at when you do have time, or perhaps someone does the work of cataloging everything you've worked on over the years.
Yeah, I think so somebody is doing that. Has started to do that now, but still, I still have to update them because I'm updating my work all the time.
Okay. And by the way,
Okay.
can you tell us about your first ever composition? Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't. I was too young, and some of it I remember, but because of my naivety at that time, I wouldn't like people to hear them. And I'm glad that nobody kept those copies, because those were baby steps, really baby steps in composition. But what that showed was that the talent was there. It just needed to be upskilled and upgraded with knowledge, more skills, and I had to grow. I had to get ideas. I had no ideas other than repeating what everybody had said before. You see, which sometimes many people have said better than I could at the time. So
Okay.
I'm glad that many of those compositions, even though people that sang them back in the day still remind me of those, I'm glad that nobody kept the copies. Because a lot has changed since then. But the first work that has been performed and over again, of course, is the well-known Zulu Mess in B flat. Yeah, which I wrote over a number of years after I completed my studies at university and I had started teaching music. And then in it, actually, what I was doing was putting into practice the knowledge and the compositional skills and techniques and the things that I had learned at university, and as to how to create a big form work like the Western composers did. So more, it's more like to me, it was an exercise to prove to myself and to my students and to all the doubters. You know, back in the day when we started learning music, a lot of people did not believe that learning music could help anyone in any way. We would get a lot of people say, hey, you music students study music there, but we don't see what you're doing in the community. So I was one of those people that wanted in some way to prove that there is something that you can learn by studying music and that it can really improve your skills, whatever they are, whether it's writing, performing, and that. Now, one thing that it cannot do, it cannot give you talent if you don't have it. But once you have the talent, it can give you all the, it can give you, no, not everything, it can give you most of the things to develop the ideas that you have and to take them to a higher level than you could without all that knowledge.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. All right. We'll take. I mean, that's a separate conversation as part of this interview, but we'll leave that at leave that there and continue with the rest of the interview. Let's talk
Yes,
about the harmonies very quickly. So you've told us the reason why you wanted to write a big work that could stand beside, or a big work similar to what other composers from different parts of the world had written up
yes,
to that point.
yes, yes,
So I have observed that people from different parts of the world, okay, when they create things, they usually use the name Africa, to stamp whatever it is they're working on. Somebody can be working
yes,
on something very
yes,
tiny or something very big, and they just say, yeah, this is Africa or African. And
yes,
dig
no,
deeper, you discover that it actually isn't. It's just using the name, almost like exploiting our name. Um,
yes, no.
so I've come across that, and it can be quite tiring, and just say, why not just be more specific? Why do you just use the name of Africa so lazily and so loosely? Why did you
Yes,
choose to call it Zulu Mass?
because it is in Zulu, my home
So
language.
okay, so it's
The
all
whole
only
thing is in Zulu, although the text is the ordinary text from all the masses taken mostly from the Roman Catholic Church service,
Mhm.
but it was I did most of the adaptation. I had to adapt it to the language because our language is have some their own peculiarities. So you can take it as it is from the Catholic. So I had to make a lot of adaptations and adjustments to make the mess relevant to the Zulu people and to mean something. Because sometimes people would say these prayers without even knowing what those things mean. I would try and go and find the exact meaning of these Latin words and how they apply to our situation as Zulu people, and then adapt it so that the music will make sense to a person who is listening to it in Zulu and still make sense to people, to someone who just Catholic everywhere else in the world.
Okay, so it's not a mass in Zulu language. It's more of a Zulu mass. So did you modify the meanings of the words in order to make it clear to people who understand Zulu language?
Yes, I had to do that. Yeah. It doesn't mean a thing if it doesn't make sense to somebody. My mother is Catholic. In fact, my whole family on my mother's side, my grandmother, they are all nominal Catholics. They would say this with, "Oh, yet Mario class." When I would ask, what is it? What does that mean? No, that's what we said. They were made to memorize that from when they were little children. They grew up. It's something that they say without meaning. If I'm in this situation, I should say this. If I'm in this situation, I say this. What does it mean? No. So I had to find those meanings and then translate them into something that means something that Zulu people can really understand.
That's interesting. Okay. Were you challenged on that composition by anybody? So with the work that you put into making sure that it was understood, the words were understood, and the meanings meant something to Zulu people, did anybody challenge you and say, well, you're modifying the mass, it's no longer E mass?
No, not on that on that issue of clarifying the language. The challenges I got mostly were from sometimes from African people who said it's too Eurocentric. And I say, did you listen carefully to everything, or you just listened to the sound of the orchestra and the sound of the voices? Did you note those rhythms, the things that were going on in between there? Did you notice all those call and responses that are there, that are very typical of our African heritage, of our African, especially Southern African heritage? Did you notice that? No. Uh, and then some, even some from the West said, yes, it has some Zulu rhythm, but it is too classical, too Eurocentric, and that. And I wouldn't disagree with that, man. But what no one is contesting is that the work stood up to the test, that as a mess, as a thing, as a piece of work, it stood up to scrutiny. It's just that there were those people that have always been nitpicking. Whatever you do, you'll never please everybody. There'll be always somebody who has an issue with that.
This brings us nicely to the next question that I want to talk about, African music. So people have said, oh, the
Yes.
work is too Eurocentric, too classical, whatever those mean. So if somebody says, oh, this is African music, how will you define African music?
I've asked that question to people who have told me that, and I say, here's the keyboard here. It's got black and white keys. Show me the African keys there that I can play, and the Westerns, the ones that I have to avoid. No one can do that. And I put a manuscript paper here. All of those 5 lines and staves. Where are the African notes here, which I can use, or which ones I cannot use? Now, the thing is, music is a universal language. It's got all the notes that everybody in the world uses, all those notes. It's those combinations that you choose that express something. Not all music is the same. When I write Western church music, I can't write like I'm writing something from the history of my people, the Zulu people. Church music has its own origins, and it has only its own influence. It's got its own inflections. Actually, when we were growing up, we were very much discouraged from using Zulu rhythms and melodic lines from our music. They would say that that's the music of barbarians. But I used it deliberately in my music, because even when we were living in the mission, we would go out and sing with the kids from the traditional community and sing those songs that were they said they were barbarian songs. So all those influences are within. It's how you combine them and your intention. Now, I always say when I speak to people about this, the context is very, very, very important. Why are you using what you are using? Context is very, very important. Otherwise, music is very universal. You can say anything you want with it, and it can connect with anybody who is in tune with what you're saying, and anyone who's not in tune with that can maybe not get it.
Okay. Who, before on the side, who referred to your music or the music you wanted to sing as children as barbarian music? And what did they mean?
Now, it's those old attitude from white missionaries and the people that were influenced by them. Is, like I said, when we grew up, a lot of things were hidden from us. We were told that the people who lived outside the mission, especially those that lived the traditional lifestyle, were barbarians, and we should avoid everything they do, their music, their what. Even though the music, some of the music that we sang in church had some African rhythm, they had to be westernized and put into four-part harmony, like there's a like hymns, sung like hymns, but you could tell that there was a lot of African influence in that singing. But they
When
said
was this?
you,
Sorry. What period was this? Is it 19 what?
that was the early 1970s, before 1976.
But that's recent though, in history.
Yes, as recent as that. I'm telling you, yes.
And you said the music had to be arranged into four-part harmonies. I thought that was just something we just did. You said it had to be. So the choir was compelled to actually put the music into four parts.
Yeah, well, maybe three. If it was a female voice choir, but there had to be a chord, a triad, which is not something very African. African mostly most of our music is using intervals. Sometimes we double the intervals, but indigenous music, especially of us Southern African Nguni people, is usually two parts, or sometimes even one part, just call and response. And then once you add the third note, then make it a triad, and immediately it's westernized.
Hmm.
It has some Western sound to it. Now, we can use it today because there is a way in which you can use the chords, but make them sound very African, the way the African musicians who then founded music with chords did. Like, for instance, guitars and accordions have been available in Africa from as early as the late 1500s when the Portuguese arrived in Mozambique. So they brought instruments with chords in them. And then the indigenous people got those instruments and played chords in the African way and played the rhythms in the African way. And then they became part of the African tradition.
All right.
But it's not indigenous.
Okay.
There's a
Oh, yeah.
difference between traditional and indigenous music.
I think we need to probably have a separate conversation about Africa's history, the history of music generally. But I don't think we'll be able to fit it into this interview. But we'll probably look at that briefly as we
Sure.
continue the conversation. But you talked about South Africa being rather isolated or cut off, um,
Yes.
and it's only recently that it's becoming more, connected to the rest of the world, rest of Africa. Information is filtering in, filtering out, in more ways
Yes.
than it used to be. So, and I asked you about the composers you admire before you named some South African composers and even composers outside of South Africa you admire, and outside of Africa rather. But let's look at you as a South African composer collaborating with other African composers. Uh,
Yes.
what to you, in a more connected South Africa today, is the best way for you to collaborate with other African composers outside of South Africa, so beyond South Africa?
I'm open to that idea anytime. just uh, just contact me and let's see. What's the word? Let's brainstorm. Let's see what you can do. But everything must we must do it not just for the sake of doing an African collaboration. Let it be inspired something and let it have a goal. And what inspires you, if it inspires me as well, and then we can do it together. Yeah, I don't like this thing of doing something just because you have to do it. Let's do it. Come up with a concept and let's brainstorm it and let's work on it. And then if it inspires me, let's take it and run with it.
Okay. So anybody who is going to watch this interview, you've heard it from the guest composer of today. He's open to ideas, suggestions, collaborations, as long as they have a push behind them and they're not just going to be collaborations for the sake of collaborating. How can people
Yeah,
contact you? They want to contact you.
yeah. Let me say you have my email and you have my phone number. You can share it with them, with those people who want to work with. I can't give it to everybody else. Just give it to those people that have a specific wish to work directly with me. I'm open to ideas anytime, and I'm open to any uh, any suggestion. Yeah, I must say yes.
Okay, brilliant. Let's talk about the topic of history just very briefly. You talk about the Portuguese coming in, instruments being adapted by Africans, and music leaving Africa to other parts of the world, being converted, modified, and then returned to Africa. We purchase what we created, so to speak. But there are people who listen to history today who contend with everything that they hear, and you can't really blame them. If history is not recorded properly, when you tell somebody this is your history, the person may choose to deny it because they'll say you're just making this up. And I think I will not be surprised if Africans are like that. To be fair to us, a lot of our history is not really recorded or made available to us. A lot of things were destroyed. Oh, it's a bit hazy and vague in many areas. And
Yes,
that's why we have this platform, for example. We're talking to you today because we want to record our history accurately.
yes,
Do you,
yes.
do you think music has a role to play in recording Africa's history, even if it's just starting from today? It doesn't have to be what happened yesterday or 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
Yes, yeah, we've already started that here in South Africa. There are works like I said, like by Professor Mziliga's Kumalo about King Shaka Kasenzangakon, and about Princess Magoko. A very fascinating story about one of the princesses of South Africa, who is the daughter of former King Dinuzulu, who was one of the people that were most harassed by the British colonial forces here in South Africa. He even had to go to exile, and the princess was born in the absence of her father, with the kingdom, Zulu kingdom, being taken over by the British. It's very fascinating. Now, and even Pelelani Mnomi has written some things about that uh, that make people find out about the history of God. I am working on something like that, and I have many more projects. History, actually, music education and history being part of that. The history of music is very important for African composers to know, and the history of African music is very important. Yeah. Now, also I have many projects in mind. If I live long enough, that to explore those options, and that we must present big works where people can come and sit down, enjoy the music while learning about part of their history. But we must be careful that the people must be able to see themselves in in that music as well, and they must be able to identify with both the music and with both the history, and we need to package it in the way that can resonate with our people. Even right now, we're still getting some resistance from our people that choral music is getting too African, sometimes for the liking of many people.
Wow, that's interesting. For
Yeah,
choral music described as becoming too African. Choral music is just what Africans do anyway,
that's what they do. Yes, but we've been accustomed to singing it like we were singing church music.
Ah, I see what they mean. Okay. Hmm.
Yes, yes. Now, when you introduce those heavy African rhythms, and people tend to think of African harmonies as being one-dimensional. No, Africa is a very big continent, and even within South Africa, we have many different cultures, and our approaches to even choral music are very, very different. So from somebody from the east of South Africa, like I'm different from people from someone from the north of South Africa and from the rest of Africa. So there's a lot to explore, even within our community ourselves, exploring our own culture.
Interesting. It's been really interesting talking to you today. We can go on for much longer, but to round up the interview, I would like to ask if you have any advice, suggestions for African composers of today, or just any topic you would like to talk about for the next 5 minutes or so, and then we can round up the interview.
Ah, that's a difficult one because we don't compose for the same reason. Uh, what I could share may not resonate with somebody. It depends on what their motives are for composition. Because for somebody who wants to write music, commercial music, and make money out of it, this advice won't make sense. But for people who want to write the kind of music like I do, I would say, right, when you have realized that you have talent first, then you've got to upskill your knowledge of your art. Art is not only about talent, but it's also about skill. It's also about knowing the materials you're working with. I can give you all the material and give you all the tools to build a house. But if you don't know when to use this material where, you will build a house, but it won't stand. It won't look as a good house should. It will still be a house, yes, right? So you need the skills, you need the knowledge as how to work with those tools. No, I'm talking about tools. I'm talking about things like rhythms, melodies, harmonies, chord progressions, and all those things that can turn an idea into a work of art. You need to, and then you need to what is called craftsmanship. We can all build houses that look the same, but somebody will do some things that are more attractive than others, even though the house has got the same four walls, same bricks, same everything, but somebody's house will look much better than what is that now. It's his craftsmanship, how he puts things in order, into perspective. Those are all the things that we can always improve. And then work on getting better ideas. People must be open-minded, read, explore the world, listen to the music of the world, look at the issues around. The music must express something. There's a saying that I was still on. I was still on. Yeah. You see, there's a saying that one of the quotes from one of the American artists, writers, that says that people may forget what you did, people may forget what you said, but they never forget how you made them feel. You can use the same notes and same thing, but what do I feel when I listen to that? That's a very, very, very important fact. Thing that one of the things that we need to consider when we speak of music as an art. Some use music as a craft, some music as a tool for making money. But if you work on music as an art, you have to be able of those things. You must have some or most of those things, like talent, knowledge, skill, craftsmanship, and most of all, expressivity. What are you saying? To whom?
Fascinating. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking out of your time today to talk to us. It's been a really interesting, very, very highly informative interview. I really appreciate it. Thank you to anybody who is going to watch this interview as a recorded interview. Thank you for your interest and your support. So, to our guest composer of today, we wish you success with your future endeavors and we hope that you keep in touch. And also, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Darush. The same, all the same to you, and to everybody who's listening. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very
All
much.
right. Bye bye. We've come to the end of the interview. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you.